The idea of ancient alien civilizations being responsible for the creation of human life or culture on planet Earth is one that a lot of people have had fun with in movies. From television shows to blockbuster films, this is an idea that seems to get a lot of attention. But it's not always brought to life in the most impressive of ways. Well, one movie that tackled that subject matter would end up spawning a gigantic franchise that was largely abandoned by its initial creators. That brand would continue to grow and establish a following all its own, but the property's 1990s roots in film are what I wanted to cover today. Stargate is a 1994 science fiction action film directed by Roland Emmerich. The movie was co-written by his longtime collaborator Dean Devlin, and if you pay attention to the way his characters are presented, the plot unfolds, and even down to the overall art design and aesthetic, you may be surprised to see how influential this little movie was in comparison to their later works like Independence Day and Godzilla. The basic premise of this movie is that an ancient stone circle is uncovered in Egypt and studied for decades until a nerdy science guy played by James Spader comes along and cracks the code on how to work the futuristic device. Kurt Russell later joins him on a mission through a strange portal to another world, across the galaxy, where it's revealed that the ancient Egyptian architecture and ways of life may have more of an extraterrestrial origin than what we've been led to believe. Now, for starters, if you haven't seen this movie before or even heard much of the massive TV series that it spawned, you may be surprised to find out that the plot actually revolves around ancient aliens that helped establish pyramid structures and pharaoh life on Earth. And that may have something to do with the fact that Stargate isn't really talked about as much as some of the director's other films, especially these days in my opinion. At the time of its release, by the way, CGI hadn't really been a Hollywood mainstay for many things outside of Jurassic Park and Terminator 2, with much of the design and aesthetics for film focusing on model work and other older traditions. This film utilizing a lot more practical effects and even more basic movie making tools than what I think Emmerich became known for later on. To put things into perspective, the story begins after a dying alien finds a younger body to possess in order to build up an empire of sorts and enslave people for his own bidding. Ancient Egyptian entities turn out being high-tech armor used to control the primitive populations, and Ra himself, a sun god of sorts villain of the film who normally looks like an alien straight out of something like the X-Files, takes the form of that possessed man. But the pyramid-styled equipment and weaponry kicks things into proper advanced civilization speculation fun when the action ramps up. Kurt Russell and James Spader go on this little quest to the desert planet to try and figure out what exactly the mysteries of this Stargate happen to be, and before you know it, a crazy battle breaks out. At the time of its release, the movie was a modest success, but many film critics were kind of mixed on it, with Roger Ebert even claiming to hate the film for some time. I don't know why. I think this has a lot to do with just very stereotypical tropes and cliches that the director employs in his movies again and again, but to be fair, just a couple of years later, that style of filmmaking and his sensibilities led to the biggest movie of 1996 with Independence Day. So the guy was on a path to success no matter what people say, and you can really see that origin shine through here. Apart from the alien technology and story elements, I think one of the more entertaining things has to be this film's cast, all of which do a really good job at bringing a story like this to life in the best ways possible. Kurt Russell playing my favorite character in the film by far. Jack O'Neill is a troubled man dealing with the loss of his young son, who accidentally shot himself. The movie actually focuses on Russell's character motivations and struggles a lot, and it kind of builds up to a meaningful transition at the end of the movie once James Spader's stereotypical nerdy character, again, someone who comes off just like Jeff Goldblum in Independence Day and Matthew Broderick in Godzilla, is able to set Jack back on a good path, away from the self-destructive and loathing sensibilities he had earlier. Speaking of similarities, by the way, with other Roland Emmerich and Dean Devlin movies, Patrick Tatopoulos was responsible for a lot of the creature design and technical work in the movie, which also helps build it up as the sort of proto-film showcasing their work that some of you may have never seen. And apart from Prometheus, if I'm being honest, this is the only one of those ancient alien civilization building movies I've watched that actually felt interesting and entertaining, which I know is kind of sad to say, but there really is something about the way Stargate tackles the subject matter and makes it a really fun ride, exploring all of these ideas. There's a great scene where Ra finds some new technology that the Earthlings have put together. I'm not going to say what it is, but he half-heartedly congratulates them on advancing as far as they have as a species, only to tell them that it's time to blow us all up in a similar way to what Ridley Scott would later do with his Alien prequel. And personally, there is a lot of stuff going on here that I think is really awesome in its own right. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that the movie is this legendary piece of cinema that has no flaws, because there are some things in the film that kind of make no sense. For example, a moment where some of the characters on the foreign planet acquire human guns seem to be a bit more silly than it should have been, since no one would really know how to operate them, and Jack doesn't seem to be the kind of guy who would just leave his weapons around without putting the safety on, if you know what I mean. So yeah, a little silly, but in the grand scheme of things, I actually think Stargate is more than just a fun little look at Roland Emmerich getting his start in major league Hollywood filmmaking, because it's got this fun early 90s charm to it that reminds you of a time before the film industry became so bloated and cynical, and it's also fun to pick people out from other movies when rewatching stuff like this too. Like, hey, anybody recognize this guy? First thing that came in my mind was, that's Cooper! Stargate kicked off a gigantic TV series that went on for several seasons in the same way Highlander was able to build a brand. But every time I hear the Stargate name, the first thing that comes to my mind is Roland Emmerich's first big budget movie that would ultimately prove to be something of a test run for what the guy would do 2 years later with Independence Day. No joke, the ships and everything in Stargate are pretty much prequel versions of what you get in the 96 film. It's kind of fun to look back at. The best way I can describe it is, think of that movie, Independence Day, mixed together with The Mummy. Only limit the usage of CGI and have it coming out in 1994. Honestly, I know some people don't think it's that great, but I'd highly recommend others to see it at least once in their lives if they're interested in the ancient alien theories and subject matter. Who knows, you may just become a fan. Anyways, guys, these are all just my own thoughts and opinions on the movie. What do you think about Stargate, and where would you rank it on Emmerich's list of movies? Honestly, I think this, alongside The Patriot and Independence Day, are some of his best works, but hey, whatever your own thoughts on Stargate happen to be, I'd love to hear them in the comments down below.